My name is Cynthia Harris. I am 70 years old, a widow, who has lived most of my life in Seattle, and I still remember the feeling of hope the morning we left for the trip. My daughter Tina had called weeks earlier and said she wanted us to spend time together as a family. I let myself believe it could be a chance to mend what had felt distant for years, a way to sit across from each other and find the closeness that seemed to have slipped away. At the airport, I felt like a visitor, not a mother. Tina walked ahead with her husband Troy while my grandson Levi had headphones and tapping on his phone, and no one slowed down to greet me. I ended up dragging my suitcase behind me while Troy joked that my ticket covered the baggage fee, so I might as well pay for everyone's bags. I nodded, not wanting to argue, but the weight of it was more than the handle could bear, and the thought pressed into me harder than the bag itself. When we landed, I tried to keep smiling even when they placed me in the backseat of the rental car with little space to stretch. Tina said it would give me more legroom, but the real reason was so they did not have to talk to me. The drive passed with them laughing about restaurants they wanted to try, while I stared out the window at the scenery. I imagined telling them how beautiful the sky looked, but the words felt wasted since no one would listen. That night at dinner, I watched Troy reach for his pockets and sigh that he had forgotten his wallet. The bill came to $245, and I slid my card across the table. He thanked the waiter, but not me, and the silence that followed was like a curtain closing. I told myself it was fine, that maybe they were tired from the flight, but the ache of paying for everyone without a single glance of gratitude stayed with me longer than the meal. The next day, they stopped at a cafe to take pictures. Tina posed with Troy in front of the counter, Levi snapped a dozen shots, and I was left at a side table with a cup of lukewarm tea. I asked if they wanted a photo of all four of us, but Tina waved it off, saying they were in a rush. I sat watching the three of them check the images on the phone and laugh while my chair scraped against the tile, reminding me that I was there, but not really seen. Later that night in the hotel, I scrolled through Levi's social media and saw a picture of the three of them with the caption, "Best trip ever, just us three." My chest tightened and I shut the phone. I had come hoping to be part of a family trip, but the words told me clearly that I was not included. The photo looked polished, their smiles wide, but the empty space where I should have been was louder than anything else. I kept carrying bags each morning when we left the hotel, my shoulders straining as Troy tossed them to me without asking. I kept paying for meals and extras, each receipt folded and tucked into my purse, as if they were souvenirs of how little I mattered. The pattern was always the same. They looked at me when something needed to be carried or covered, and then they turned away. By the fourth day, the weight was not just on my back, but in my chest. I had hoped for laughter for one warm moment where Tina would look at me and remember I was her mother. Instead, I sat in hotel lobbies while they planned outings without me, or in restaurants where my only role was to settle the check. I smiled, I nodded, but inside I was shrinking. It is a strange thing to realize you are present but invisible. The sound of their voices filled the air but never touched me. Each small humiliation piled on the last until it felt like I was disappearing in plain sight. I wanted so much for this trip to stitch us together, yet every day it pulled the threads looser, and by then I knew I was only holding on to the hope, not to them. The border crossing was crowded with cars inching forward under a harsh mid-morning sun. The heat pressed down on the pavement until it shimmered, and the smell of exhaust hung in the air like a heavy blanket. Tina and Troy walked several steps ahead, with Levi at their side, their laughter mixing with the hum of idling engines. I trailed behind, gripping two bags that dug into my shoulders and made my back stiff. Sweat rolled down my spine, my sandals slipped on the uneven gravel, and each step felt harder than the last. I watched the three of them point at the Welcome to Canada sign and pose as if nothing existed behind them. Troy glanced over his shoulder, his voice sharp but casual. "If she can't keep up, she can carry the bags or walk home." His words sliced through me like glass, and the silence that followed was worse. Tina said nothing, and Levi chuckled under his breath, confirming that I had been erased in plain sight. The sound of their laughter blended with the low rumble of traffic, but for me everything slowed. My grip loosened on the straps and I could hear the thud of my own heartbeat louder than the cars. I bent slightly, placed the bags carefully on the white line painted across the pavement, and straightened my back. For a moment I stood still, the straps dangling empty from my hands. My shoulders felt light, almost weightless, even as my chest ached. The voices ahead grew fainter as they moved forward without looking back. To my right was a small blue sign with an arrow pointing down a narrow road toward a village whose name I could not pronounce. The paint was faded, but it might as well have been a beacon. I turned my body toward it, my pulse steadying with each breath. The sun burned on my neck and sweat stung my eyes, yet I felt a rush of calm spread through me. I stepped off the main path and walked toward the arrow, each footfall slow and deliberate, as if time itself had slowed to watch. The bag sat neatly behind me, left on the line like a marker of the life I was no longer willing to carry. In that instant, my decision became final. Dignity mattered more than belonging to a family that refused to see me. The heat, the traffic, and their laughter all faded as I walked away not with drama, but with the quiet power of someone who had finally chosen herself. I followed the narrow road until I reached a small turnout where an old bus idled. The paint was faded, the lettering chipped, but when I asked the driver in halting words if it went to the nearest town, he nodded. I dropped $3 into the box, found a seat by the window, and let my body sink into the cracked vinyl cushion. The bus pulled away from the border and rolled down a quiet road lined with tall trees. Sunlight filtered through the branches and flickered across my face, as if the world itself was giving me permission to rest. I turned my phone off completely and placed it in my purse, and in the hush that followed, I realized silence could feel like oxygen filling my lungs. Through the window, I saw cottages with flower boxes, a small bakery with fogged windows, and children tossing pebbles into a fountain. The town was called Haven Ridge, though I could barely make out the letters on the wooden sign. It looked like a place untouched by hurry, a place where no one would ask me to carry what was not mine. I stepped off the bus and followed a cobbled lane that led to a modest inn with white shutters and flower pots on the sill. The bell above the door chimed softly when I entered. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes, who later introduced herself as Marjorie, looked at me closely and said in a gentle voice, "Quiet is good for the bones." She gave me a simple room with pale curtains and a view of the hills. I laid my small bag on the bed and listened to the faint song of birds outside the open window. For the first time in years, my chest loosened, and I felt the first true breath of relief, as if I had stepped into a life where I no longer had to disappear. The next morning, the inn was quiet except for the faint creak of the old wood and the sound of birds outside the window. I carried my purse down to the small lobby where a dusty computer sat on a desk for guests to use. My hands trembled only once as I logged into my account, but the moment the page loaded, my focus sharpened like a blade. I called the bank and spoke to a woman with a steady voice. She asked if I wanted to revoke secondary access on my account, and I said yes. When she asked for the name to remove, I gave Tina's. My voice did not shake. The screen refreshed, and the words confirmed the change, and for the first time in years, I felt the chain unclasp. Then I called my lawyer in Seattle, a man who had known me since George passed. He answered warmly and asked if everything was all right. I told him I wanted to sell the family house and revise my will. He paused, then said he would begin the paperwork immediately. His calm words felt like a door opening, and I stepped through without looking back. I told him to redirect my estate to my nieces, the ones who still send Christmas cards and remember my birthday. They may not live close, but they never erased me. He prepared the documents and sent them to my email. I opened the attachments on the old screen, read every line, and pressed print. The machine hummed, spitting out pages that carried my new future. I signed my name with a borrowed pen from the inn's counter. Each stroke felt like carving into stone. I stacked the forms, neatly scanned them back, and clicked send. The confirmation email appeared a moment later, black letters on a glowing screen. My reflection in the glass looked older but steadier than I had ever seen. I leaned close and whispered to myself, "This is the last time I pay for my own humiliation." The words filled the empty lobby, and for once, silence answered with approval. It was not a loud victory, but it was enough. Justice did not come from shouting or begging. It came from reclaiming what was mine with the quiet certainty of a signature. That evening, I sat by the small desk in my room with a sheet of paper and a pen. The quiet of Haven Ridge wrapped around me like a blanket, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to speak even if no one else would hear it. I began a letter to Levi, the boy who once called me Grandma C and clung to my neck with sticky fingers after drawing dragons and crooked hearts. I wrote that I did not walk away because I was weak. I walked away because they all assumed I never would. I told him I had a life before he was born, filled with stories and scars, and I deserved to be seen as more than the woman who carried bags and paid bills. My words were gentle but firm, lined with love, but also with grief that had grown too heavy to keep. When the letter was finished, I folded it carefully and slid it into the drawer beside the bed. I did not address it. I did not sign it for the mail. It was not meant to be sent. It was meant to free me from carrying unspoken truths that had weighed me down. As I sat back, I thought of Tina, my daughter, who had been so sharp with me on this trip. A part of me knew her cruelty was not born from pure malice, but from fear. She grew up in a house where money was tight, where she often felt she did not have enough, and that hunger for control never left her. Scarcity shaped her, and she passed the burden to me without even seeing it. That realization did not excuse her words, but it softened the edges of my anger. I could forgive without opening the door again. I could see her wounds without letting them decide my future. In that small room with the hills beyond the window, I felt the ache of love and the relief of release, and both belonged to me. 6 months later, my life looked nothing like the one I left behind. I rented a small apartment on the edge of a lake just outside Seattle, a place where the mornings began with light breaking over the water and the sound of ducks gliding across the surface. On the wall near the door hung a single key on a small wooden hook. It was not decoration. It was a promise to myself that I alone decided who stepped through my door. One afternoon there was a knock. When I opened it, Tina stood on the porch with her hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. She looked thinner, her eyes shadowed, and she whispered that she was sorry. I invited her in, and we sat across from each other at the small table by the window. She said she wanted to make things right, that she had replayed the trip in her mind, and shame followed her with every memory. I listened, but when she asked if we could go back to how things used to be, I shook my head. I told her apology was not a reset button. It mattered, but it did not erase what had been done. Her eyes filled, and she nodded slowly as if she knew I would not bend this time. We spoke for a few minutes, more quiet words that landed softly but carried weight. When she left, she touched my shoulder lightly and said she hoped we might find a new way someday. I told her maybe, but only if respect came first. That evening, I walked down to the lake with Walter, a widower I had met at the library. He carried a small thermos of coffee, and we sat on a bench while the breeze lifted the edge of my scarf. Birds called from the trees, and the water shimmered with the late sunlight. We did not talk about the past. We let the quiet be enough. As I sipped the warm coffee, I felt peace settle into my bones, like it had been waiting for me all along. I thought of the border of the bags left behind, of the silence that once frightened me, but now felt like a gift. They told me to walk home. I did. And for the first time, home is mine. Life teaches us that respect cannot be begged for. Cynthia's story is a reminder that dignity begins the moment we stop carrying what was never ours to carry. Setting boundaries does not mean we stop loving. It means we choose love that does not erase us. For many of us, especially in our later years, it is easy to feel like background characters in our own families. But the truth is, we still have the right to decide who sits at our table, who holds a key, and who earns a place in our hearts. If this story spoke to you, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in Cynthia's place? Subscribe to this channel for more stories that honor resilience, self-respect, and healing. And if you know someone who needs this reminder, share the video with them today. Tomorrow, something special awaits you.